Hello everyone, welcome back from lunch. I hope you all had a good time mingling with each other and enjoying the bright weather we have here in Reykjavik. Those of you who come from abroad, we never know, so anytime there's a bit of sun, every Icelandic person goes crazy and needs to be outside. So thank you, every Icelandic person, for still being here with us. So this is the most popular workshop. We won. So it's on the well-being of the youngest children in the early childhood education and care. And what we are going to do is that we have 3 presentations, and they will come here and present their slides. And afterwards, they will sit here, and we will take questions that come through the Slido. And please don't hesitate to put in your questions, as we go along, because we felt like in a session before that sometimes they were coming a bit late, so it was hard to fit them in. But we have more time now for discussion, and we really want to have active participation here. So I think I'm just going to let the presenters present themselves. So the first one that I introduce you to is May-Britt Drugli, and she is talking about toddler transition to early childhood education and care. Varsågoda.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everybody. And first, I want to thank very much for being invited to this nice conference in Reykjavik. And I'm here today to talk about toddlers' transition to early childhood education and care, and I will call it ECEC later on. In Norway, like in many other countries, most children aged about 1 year old now attend ECEC. All these young children need to experience a very positive transition from home to ECEC, in addition to, of course, high-quality care in the ECEC.
I'm sorry,
yeah.
I didn't get enough time in the spotlight. So no, I'm just going to say that for the slide, though, that you need to change rooms. So before lunch, we were in the morning session, and now we're in workshop B, right? Mm-hmm. Yes. So please put your question in workshop B. I'm sorry.
That's okay. Then, first I want to say something general about transitions. A transition in life involves a change in setting, for example, from one job to another, or from home to ECEC. And every transition in our lives represents a period of reorganization of routines and roles. During a transition, we need to adapt to a new setting and find out what is expected there. For example, we need to establish new relationships with new people. Transitions is therefore about becoming comfortable in a new and unfamiliar environment, a process that often can be experienced as difficult. But, however, every transition in life also, even if they are challenging, they also always represent possibilities for growth, learning, and development. And that is important to remember. If we then focus on toddlers' transition from home to ECEC, this transition is about becoming familiar with the new ECEC environment. For example, the daily routines that may differ very much from the routines at home, the rooms that, of course, look different, the noise level that are very different, and the smell, the new toys, and so on. And it is about forming relationships with new caregivers and peers. That's a huge process for a young child. And the child also needs to deal with separation from their parents and regulation of negative emotions connected to this separation. Since toddlers have immature brains and low capacities for self-regulation, they need a lot of external support from adults in this process. We know that the transition process to different ECEC centers and in different countries also, they differ. Sometimes they differ due to the child temperament, or they can differ due to transition routines. For example, in Norway, it has been for many, many years very common that parents only stay in the ECEC for 3 days when a 1-year-old starts. In other countries, it's common that the parents are there for maybe 2 weeks. For a toddler, there are certain aspects that separate a successful transition from an unhappy transition. A successful transition involves child feelings of strength, competence, and happiness. In a successful transition, the toddler is supported when dealing with challenges, and that is very important. The transition then may represent something called positive stress, which may promote child mental health and learning. During an unhappy transition, on the other hand, the toddler have a lot of negative feelings like frustration, fear, and loss. And in an unhappy transition, they receive little support. Unhappy transitions are often due to negative relationships in the new environment and may lead to both short-term and long-term problems. In school, for example, research has shown that as much as 5 to 10% of children have long-term problems due to an unhappy and difficult transition. A key to ensure a successful transition for toddlers is to establish what is called the caring triangle. Some elements of a caring triangle they are one of the parents enter the ECEC together with the child as a bridge builder between the home and the ECEC. At least one professional caregiver, often named the child's key worker, gradually gets to know the child and becomes an important relational figure. The parents need to support this process. Strong relationships between the key worker, parents, and the toddler are core ingredients of this caring triangle. So, now we are going to look more on some research that focuses on toddlers' transition to ECEC. There are some studies focusing on stress levels during the transition phase. Stress levels are assessed by taking saliva samples, which then is analyzed to measure the levels of the stress hormone cortisol. Such studies of cortisol levels can help us to understand something about the toddler's experience during the transition to ECEC. Stress levels in saliva samples can be viewed as toddlers' own voice in the research focusing on transitions. Normally, cortisol levels are high in the morning and they decline during the day, shown in the figure to the right. This biorhythm is also found for toddlers. Here I want to present some results from a Norwegian study. During this study, we measured the stress levels of 121 Norwegian toddlers during the transition phase, 1-year-olds. Their stress levels were measured at 10 a.m., the yellow line, and at 3 p.m. in the ECEC, the pink line, and then at 6 p.m. at the home, the blue line, the green line, I'm sorry. No, I said yellow, but it's blue. Maybe I lost my color sight. Saliva samples were then collected both during the first days when the parents were present in the ECEC, the 2 first bullet points, the first days when the parents no longer were present, the bullet point 3 and 4, and after 4 to 6 weeks, the last bullet point. The most important finding of this study were that toddler stress levels were relatively low when the parents were present, and that it peaked during the afternoon on the second day when the parents were absent, bullet point 4. After 4 to 6 weeks, the stress levels were declining. Another important finding was that stress levels declined after the children arrived at home in the afternoon, the green line. At home, the children seemed to be back to the normal biorhythm during the whole transition phase regarding cortisol levels. This finding underscores the important role that parents have during toddlers' transition to ECEC. Children who were under the age of 14 months when they started in ECEC showed somewhat higher stress levels than those who were older. And in our study, the youngest child was 11 months. I would now like to show you some preliminary findings from a study not yet published. The name of this study is Little and New in ECEC. In this study, we have measured the stress levels of 100 toddlers from the municipality of Trondheim during the 3 first weeks when parents no longer were present in the ECEC, as well as after 3 months. Before the first measurement, one of the parents had followed the child in the ECEC for at least 5 days. Further, caregivers and parents were told to rate the child's well-being at the same days as we assessed the stress levels. As you see in the figure, we found that stress levels were stable and high both the first and second week without parents in ECEC, and had showed a small decline during the 3rd week. It declined even more during the 2 next months. As you also see, child well-being, as reported by parents, increased during the same period as the stress levels declined. Caregivers had almost similar ratings of well-being as the parents. So you see it's a good fit between the stress curve, if we can call it that, and the well-being curve of the children. That could mean that one should pay special attention to parents if parents claim that their child struggles with settling into the ECEC. Maybe it's something about stress and a little well-being. Here I would like to summarize some findings from other studies that have explored toddlers' transition to ECEC. The 2 studies I have described so far show that most toddlers seem to adjust quite well during the first month in the ECEC, but there are also other studies showing that some children at least use 4 to 5 months to adapt to their ECEC. Studies also have shown that the key person approach, which is based on attachment theory and entails that 1 or 2 caregivers had a special responsibility for a certain group of children during the transition phase, seem to ease toddlers' transition to ECEC. One larger study shows that toddlers with parents who are particularly anxious about their child starting in ECEC tend to struggle more with their transition. So, by supporting these insecure parents and making them feel more comfortable, one probably can make the adjustment easier also for their children. So, what can we do to support toddlers' transition to ECEC? First, I think it's very important to understand that this is a process that may take some time, for some children even quite a long time, and it is not an isolated event. Parents need to be given positive and useful information about the ECEC and the transition process, both before and during the transition. This information should be given several times and in several ways. Our experience is that parents forget a lot if you give them the information early on. It's also important with a very good dialogue between the professional caregivers and the parents during the whole transition process. This dialogue should start before the child starts in ECEC. For example, it's important that parents feel free to ask questions. Many parents in our studies tell that they know very little about the life in ECEC, and they know very little about their role during the transition phase. Caregivers, on the other hand, should request information about the child from the parents. Such information will make it easier for the caregivers to be sensitive toward the needs of each child. To support the children's transition to ECEC, one should invite parents and toddlers to frequent informal visits before the start. By doing this, children and the parents in an easy way will get familiar with the new setting, which support a smooth start. During these visits, toddlers and parents get known to other parents and new toddlers before the formal start. Frequent visits also make it more likely that the professional caregivers gain useful information about the particular child and the family. This may ensure a flexible support for each child and parent when they start in the ECEC. In the project Little and New in ECEC, both parents and caregivers talk about such visits before the start as a huge success factor. The visits seem to build positive associations with the new environments, and the visits were conducted 1 hour once a week for 4 to 8 times. Giving toddlers time and support to establish relationships with their professional caregivers is one of the best predictive factors for a positive transition. Every toddler, therefore, should have 1 or 2 key workers that are sensitive and responsive towards the toddler, making the toddler feel secure in ECEC. And key workers should actively encourage toddlers to make secondary attachments to them. For example, being very sensitive towards each toddler. It's important that parents support the interactions between the key workers and the toddler, and it can be necessary that parents stay in the ECEC for several days, together with the child. One important role for the parent is to represent a secure base for the toddler's exploration of the ECEC and all the new relationships. Another easier element that can be useful for toddlers is to bring a transition object, for example, a toy, from their home. This object may represent security for the toddler and hence help them during the transition process. This transition object may also be a song that have been used in the Little and New in ECEC, and the child know then heard the same song both at home and in the ECEC. We know now that at least the first 3 weeks without the parents in ECEC can be particularly challenging for toddlers, and during these weeks we often see a lot of tired, hungry, frustrated, and clingy toddlers. Hence, during this period, the toddlers need predictive routines and a lot of support both in the ECEC and at home. This entails giving them sensitive care, not too busy days in ECEC, shorter days in ECEC if possible, making sure that they get to spend quiet time with their parents in the afternoons and that they get enough sleep. It may be a good idea to think about toddlers' transition to ECEC in 3 phases: before starting, the days where parents are present, and the first weeks without parents present. High quality on based on toddlers' needs during all these 3 phases may contribute to a successful transition to ECEC. If they cooperate well, parents and caregivers can do a lot so that the ECEC becomes a new happy place to be for each toddler. I think that should be a very important goal for us. And it's like success during the transition from home to ECEC may lay the foundation for later positive transition, for example, starting in school, and for child resilience. And then it has to be a positive transition. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, May-Britt. I think I forgot to introduce myself when we started, which is very typical of me. My name is Jenny Ingudóttir. I work at the Directorate of Health, and I am the project manager for health promoting preschools. So these topics are, very important to me. And I have to say that unwittingly, during the lunch break, I actually told May-Britt that when I lived in Spain just over 20 years ago with my toddler, we had no adoption phase. It was just, yes, she can start this preschool, please leave. And when I said, well, can I stay with her for a while? No. Then everyone would want to stay at the preschool these foreigners. I was lucky enough that I could have her for half a day for 1 week and then the whole time. And I'm really happy that we are so much further along here in the Nordic countries, and hopefully my friends in Spain have caught up also. But next I want to introduce Nicole Mosti, who was the moderator for us this morning, and she had a title that is really a mouthful. Are you ready? Quality inclusive early childhood education and care for children under 2 years of age, shaping the development of children, families, and society. Nicole.
Hello. It's an honor to be here. I just leave it at that. It's an honor. This is a job you do because you have passion for it. Does that not speak for everyone in this room? So today I'm going to talk about the first 1,000 days. And you got the mouthful. And I have to be really quick because I have lots of slides. In terms of human development, the importance of early childhood education and care, it can't be overstated. We know that. We know the importance of it. Those of us who have worked and do work in this field are always saying this. It's sort of like a mantra. Remember how important it is. But research has demonstrated that quality early childhood education and care at its very early age has lasting benefits for infants and their families, especially those from diverse backgrounds or disadvantaged sectors across society. It's really important. The reason that I say this, it's really important for us to understand, just as Jenny mentioned, some of us who move to countries, our first connection to that country is through the early childhood care providers. The first steps into systems and other systems is through early childhood care. The first steps of understanding the culture of the new country you come to and the culture you're hoping to adjust your children to become agents of change and active participancy. So it's very, very important that we understand this when we think of what we do and when we think of that multi-ethnic, those divides, and how we can separate and eradicate them, Important for ECEC providers to adapt to the needs of and learn to understand the backgrounds of children, their parents, and families. I met a wonderful woman named Kate from New Zealand who said to me, when I was at a Penn Green school in England, she had said to me, every touch that I witness between a mother and her child or a family member and their child when they're being introduced into our school matters. I'm observant. I learn from them. And I use every opportunity that I touch a child, whether it be through my words or my hands, to do the same. How? So I'm here to speak to you today about a little, I get into little side projects. I'm a pretty strange person. I spent time from 2018 working with a private ECE school in California who was hoping to expand and become a chain. And they were looking for someone from a Nordic country to come in and revamp the curriculum and upskill their employees, come with new ideas. And the idea was that this curriculum would then be digitalized. And we were working with EA Sports to do that. And so from 2018 until June of 2020, yes, COVID, I worked back and forth between California to create a curriculum, and I was afforded the opportunity to work with an infant curriculum, to develop one for children from 6 weeks of age. And in that portion of the curriculum, I focused on the following 3 elements: maintain optimum ratios of adults and infants, and we called them primary caregivers. I know there are other terms, key workers and whatnot, but this is what we termed them there. Ongoing training, including in the specialist area of infant pedagogy, curriculum and documentation were my tools there. Because we obviously, those of us who work in early childhood know we are not sending people to courses on a regular basis. We don't have hands, we don't have time, and we don't have funding. So we need to use what we have. And the curriculum, as I was taught when I was in university here in Iceland, is the mother of all tools, the giver. And then developing inclusive environments which facilitate low levels of stress and incorporate cultural stimulations and familiarities, which ties right into what my colleague said before. So if we look closely first at the optimum ratios of adults to infants, I broke it down like this. Adults working with smaller number of infants while receiving ongoing training can develop specialist knowledge and skills, because as any of us working in this field knows, there's a major difference between a 6-year-old child and a 6-year-old child. And if you don't understand those differences, then you're not able to capably facilitate for that 6-week-old to make it to 6 months with everything they need. Are able to keep attuned to the individual development and progress and needs of young children and their families. They need to be attuned adults and quality inclusive environments. They've shown impact on the social, emotional, and linguistic, physical, and cognitive development of infants. Using those terms from Reggio, as we all know, our environments are our third teachers, and what we can do to enhance them and utilize them. Some of these impacts are felt immediately, while others emerge later, and all have long-term implications for both individuals and society. As I mentioned, especially, I was asked specifically to speak about working with diverse parents, so I'll weave it throughout my course. Primary caregiver. The idea was, again, optimal small ratios. Group size and adult-child ratios determine the amount of time and attention each caregiver can devote to each child. Infants need individualized care and one-on-one time for interactions and routines. We had groups of 3 to 4 infants, depending on how young they were. If they were getting closer to 1-year-old, then they were 4. If they were 6 weeks, they were 3. And there were only ever 2 members of staff who worked with each group. The children interacted with all members of staff around the room in certain areas, but these 2 people were primarily responsible because they had documentation and collaboration roles with parents. Primary caregivers and continuity of care. This is really important. It ties really into what you were saying, that fluidity, that children aren't living a life where they're waiting and changing and adapting. We do it fine at 50, but at 6 weeks, 6 months, it's not necessary. Assigning each child a primary caregiver promotes the caring one-on-one relations that help babies thrive. Child security depends on their primary caregiver. It develops positive relationships with her family and comes to know the values and wishes of their child. And that works both ways, parents and teachers. Their understanding of the child is much better. Active and responsive caregiving to support children's development. The active and responsive caregiver takes cues from each child to know when to expand on the child's initiative, when to guide, and when they teach, and when they intervene. Curriculum, observation, individual programming. The 6 weeks, 12 months curriculum is based upon the sound understanding of child development and appropriate practices while tracking into account the individual needs and temperaments of each child in our care. Emerging language and literacy. The path to literacy begins with conversation between caregivers and young children. Here are the tools I created. This is our charting for on the left side. This is a charting, and what it is, it's for notes. What did I do today with emotional health? What did I witness today with the child I'm responsible for caring? For literacy, I can't even read the letters, but you see the different areas of our curriculum that we work with throughout all of early childhood. We were able to take notes, to identify, to say what was happening. And on the right, because we're working with individuals, and one day little Tommy might want to sleep from 10 to 12, it's okay, we have the flexibility. We're just documenting day to day how the routines are, how we're eating, what's going on. And this helps us to make better decisions about what we need in our rooms, what upskilling our teachers need, and to better communicate with parents. Parents were also given mirrors to work with, to let us know, when did little Tommy start to lift his shoulders up when he laid on his stomach? So we know that in the classroom, it's good for us to have a little bar and a mirror down here so Tommy can continue to do that. Aim of curriculum. Ensure provision of quality ECEC. I mean, that's really important. That's what we want. We want to deliver quality. quality in care, and quality in development. Chart development of infants, continual development of skills and knowledge among staff regarding the importance of stages in development and of individual care. It surprises me often when I've gone, I do upskilling courses sometimes for an agency here called Mimir, for people who work in preschools. And it surprises me sometimes when I speak about developmental stages. When I'll say, oh, when a child does this, it leads to them to be able to do this later. How often someone doesn't make that connection. And of course it shouldn't, because not everyone, it has taken 6 years of training to do this, but they need to get it somewhere because they're trusted to work in this field. So this curriculum, it has everything benched out. I'll show you. Key factors, and I call it professionalism. Well-defined developmental benchmarks, mapped out linear development, 1 leads to 2, leads to 3, goes on. Structured play and developmental time. So when we were doing the charts on the other page and we saw when the baby sleeps, when the baby eats, when the baby does this, then we saw our opportunity to do structured, have certain things in our environment, to do structured things to help to support the child. Or if maybe it's a child who cries a lot, that we needed to have more structured time for emotional development. Collaboration, open communication between caregivers and parents. These charts are accessible to parents. Like I said, we're working on developing the app. They're still working on it. The app is accessible to parents, so parents see everything we see. There are no secrets. These are 2 more of the tools. One of the tools here, these are the benched out charting on the right, and you see everything's lined up. This is how development is, supposed to happen, but we know there are things that happen in different orders. And they're charted out 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. The caregiver documents where they are at 3 months. Are they doing it very well? Are they doing it on their own? Have they mastered it? And they write the date when something's completed. So care workers, our primary caregivers in the classroom, they understand. A 3-month-old, you can chart it just like you would the weight and gains. And also then in our classrooms, we have simple literary examples of what it means. What is animated walking? What is crawling? What are the things? So we can think about what tools do we have in our room? What are we doing? Parents have access to this too, so they understand and they share with us when a benchmark happens at home and we can chart it with us. A few more tools. This is another chart. I don't know, I can't see what I have. This is walking. These are getting a little bit older. And here we have developmental activities for infants. These were charts that actually COVID helped us to have these. They were designed for parents, but the staff love them so much that these are present in the school. They're just activities that support our curriculum, activities that support our development. And they work. People are inspired. They want to read more. They want to do more. They look for more ideas. Like I said, a lot of things I'm saying aren't really rocket science. As we know, the environment is extremely important. And these are different images from the school. The environment must facilitate low levels of stress and promote a sense of security for infants. Infants need to feel like this is their kingdom. This is their place. These are their tools, and our staff need to understand that. Balance between care and promotion of all forms of development. Sometimes I've gone into school environments where the balance of care and development isn't there. You'll go in and you'll see an environment where everything is based on care. You'll have cribs and changing beds and chairs for the staff to sit in and maybe hold the babies, but you don't have the tools for the baby, for that natural curiosity, that natural need for development and for challenge. So you need to make sure you have all of this in there. And another thing, this shot from below is actually, it wasn't from the preschool I worked in, it was from another one. I loved it, where they found a way to incorporate and a culturally stimulating and familiar things. They had woven carpets that you might find at home if you had gone home to the Iranian family. That's where it actually came from, who was in the school. So if you start to think about how you can balance those things for those children who exactly, I've got 5 minutes. Staff must now have access to all the tools they need, and that's really important for them and for children. My years of working in preschools and early childhood centers, I feel like there's a whole lot of running around. We're always looking for something. Something's not here, something is somewhere else. Oh, I need to print something out. But in these environments that we were creating, everything was there. If you were going to do your documenting, you weren't stressed. It was there. It's where you needed it to be. You had everything in place, and that's the reason that we were trying to animate it in an app, because it made it even easier. And the thing about it is, not only were the tools available there for us, they were available for parents. Parents could come in and they could see them, and they could continue their collaborations with us. And that's our next one, our collaborations with our parents. I know that I'm preaching to the choir here, but it's something we really, really need to understand when we're working with parents of multi-ethnic backgrounds. It's always important but critical for infant care and development. And the more communication we have from the beginning about basic developmental things, the more we open up to hearing how they do things, whether or not we approve. That's why I maybe slide this picture in here. In Japan, there's a certain festival, or it's like a rite of passage that's done with babies. They're given food, and it's before they're actually eating solids. But there's a certain, we don't have time for me to go over, but it's a very important thing that happens in the life of a baby. And it's something that happens oftentimes away from us. We don't know. We don't know about this because it's not, we're busy talking to them about breast milk and all of this, that we're not, this is very, very important that we open our schools to the idea that cultural events and cultural happenings are tied directly to how they raise children, how people raise children, and their expectations of us. So then that also allows them to open up, when I show them this crazy curriculum, to be open to my expectations of them. And it works better. I had some really wonderful interactions in California with families from places I'd never imagined I'd meet people from. But like I say, we learn from each other and we teach each other. The only way to create inclusiveness in your classrooms is through working with and listening to parents about customs, about developmental ideas, about practices and expectations. Because there will come up things, like Sigrun mentioned this morning, nobody gets a manual when they have their child. There are customs, there are things that we do at home. I admit I've made plenty of mistakes with my children, even though I'm supposed to know what I'm doing. But they matter. They matter that we have access to that information and we can help. I had a 2-year-old come once for his first orientation at my preschool, and he took my cup of espresso, and I went into a panic. I said, oh my gosh, does he know what's in there? And the mother just said to me, oh, that's fine. We drink even stronger coffee at home. He could make his own. Not exaggerating. So this was a very important thing. And parents need to feel welcome and if they are equal partners from the beginning, especially when we're starting with infants. No language barriers. We really, especially when we're working with infants, we have to make sure we allow for no language barriers. I look at you with that. We have to find ways. We have digital technology to help us translate. There are translators. Parents want to speak to us as well. And if we show a hindrance, they're not going to reach out further either. It's really important that we don't allow for that. And parents of multi-ethnic backgrounds often have more communication and connection with society through us, as I mentioned in the beginning, through our centers than through other agencies. So we are their way into the healthcare system in some instances. We are their way into welfare and social systems. So remember that. And I have no more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nicole, and thank you for being on time. She couldn't do otherwise after this morning that she was harassing everyone like, time is up. That's it. Next one, please. And it's a really important feature. You get to a conference and you're about to make a speech and the person before you talks and talks like I'm doing now, and then you don't have, can you do your talk in 5 minutes? It's very rude. We should not allow it. And finally, I will Yeah, see, I talked so much that my computer closed. Serves me right. I was thinking about how I'm going to disobey Sigrun and say something more, but it's very short. And I mean, Nicole paved the way for it, because we're talking about communication with parents. Again, when I lived with my daughter in Spain, I went and visited the preschool. There was one guy who was working temporarily at the office who could say a few words in English. I didn't speak Spanish. Don't move to Spain if you don't speak Spanish. And so he showed me around, and then and she was there for like 2 months, and then I came back and I could speak some Spanish, and I was like, okay, what do the children do in the daytime? Like, I want to know what my daughter is doing here during the daytime. So it's so important that we find ways to communicate. But the last speaker here is from Finland, Noora Heiskanen. Was it okay? Her presentation is called The Child's Play in Finnish Early Childhood Education and Care. And I just have to say I had the pleasure of meeting a Finnish researcher who was working in the preschool system or preschool education at the university. So I have very high expectation. They had an excellent program. Noora.
Hi, so no pressure at all. High expectations and so. But it's very nice to be here. I'm Noora Heiskanen, as we say in Finnish, but your version was as good. Okay, so the previous presentations gave a very good background for this one as well. So first I want to thank you two for having wonderful presentations. I'm going to talk about the child's plan, or an ECEC plan, as we call it in Finland, which is basically a pedagogical document, a plan for child's education in early childhood education and care. I'm a senior researcher in the field of special education, and I'm specialized in early childhood special education. I have also worked in early childhood education and care before doing my PhD in the field of special education. I have studied 3 research teams. One is this documentation related to child's ECEC, but I have also studied the effectiveness of social emotional interventions in early childhood education and care, as well as multi-professional or interprofessional cross-sectoral collaboration in Finnish early childhood education and care. But that's all about me. Then we are going to discuss about individual ECEC plans in Finnish ECEC. First, I'm going to describe some general principles and background, and then we are going to have a case example of one toddler in Finnish ECEC. I'm going to actually show you what the plan is like, what is written in it, and how it's used in planning that child's education. But basically, in Finnish ECEC, we have had quite big changes and developments during the last 10 years. In 2013, so almost 10 years ago, ECEC was moved from the Ministry of Health to the Ministry of Education. And in 2015, we had a new legislation, Early Childhood Education and Care Act, in which it is stated, and still is stated, that each child in Finnish ECEC has their own individual plan for the planning their education, basically. Before that, for decades, I would say, these kinds of plans have been done for the children in Finnish ECEC. I once discussed with a professional ECEC teacher in Finland who said that she had been doing these plans over 30 years already. So again, this is a practice that was first implemented in practice and developed and so on, and only then, after we have had these reforms in our legislation and in our system, it was made mandatory. But nowadays, each child has their own plan. And the plan is not only document. It's not only a paper, but it's, as you described, it's a part of pedagogical documentation, and it is a process of collaboration and participation, increasing the quality of ECEC and meeting the individual needs and interests and strengths of a particular child. So it's about equality and quality, it's about participation, and it's about individuality. These three things are the main aims and reasons for drafting these plans. And in the Finnish National Agency for Education, as they are the ones that give the curriculum for ECEC in Finland, they also give guidelines for drafting these plans. And in their website they have this beautiful picture that illustrates the process of ECEC plan in Finland. So it's not only about document, it's about the process. When the child begins in ECEC and enters the daycare center or family daycare, which are the two options available in Finland, this preparation phase or getting familiar with the child begins naturally. This plan is not drafted immediately. It's drafted only after professionals get familiar with the child. And this documentation of pedagogical activities or pedagogical documentation as a wider concept includes, of course, observations, different kind of, perhaps you actually described the many methods and many different kind of activities that are also implemented in Finnish ECEC. And after that, the actual drafting of a plan takes place. And it's always conducted in close collaboration with parents. As the one aspect is the participation. It's about participation of a child, but also participation of parents or guardians of a child. So all the observations and discussions about the child's needs and interests and strengths are combined, and an ECEC plan discussion takes place. There, a teacher or some other staff member discusses with the child's parents. And the discussion, there is no strict rules or instructions even for the discussion, but it focuses on the child's interest, child's strength and child's needs, and aims at developing a pedagogical plan, how to meet these needs and child's individual situation in the pedagogical activities. Then the concrete plan, the document is drafted, and it is revisited at least yearly, even though it's quite typical to have those discussions twice a year with parents. And I want to highlight that this is a practice that takes place considering all the children, not only for those who have special educational needs, for example. When a child has special educational needs, that is one aspect of the plan, but it's not, the plan is never only about the challenges, or it's not never only about the things that needs to be developed. It's also about the positive aspects, the aspect the child enjoys, for example, and that kind of things. Here is a document form, very concretely. I have links to all of these if you want to look at them afterwards. So these are openly available in the agency's website. But we have this format for the plan, which is basically contains, of course, personal information. But after that, there is parts for the collaboration. So what parents think about the situation, how their needs, their thoughts have been taken under the consideration, and the child's, of course. And when we are talking about small children, as you said, 6 weeks old, that's not typical in Finnish ECEC, but in theory it would be possible. But 9 months old, 10 months old, 1 year old, 2 year olds, they also have a right to participate. But of course, as we all know, it doesn't mean that they sit in the same table to discuss with you. It can mean, for example, that their interests are observed in the daily situations, as I will show you in my example. But the focal point is that the child's viewpoint needs to be taken into account, and educators, teachers need to document how they have done it. Then there is a place for assessment, of course, the yearly assessment at least. And when the child has special educational needs, identified needs for educational support in ECEC, then they also have to document how the effectiveness of support has been assessed and followed. But I would say the core of the plan is these objectives and measures to plan the child's education. So the child's situation, including strengths, interests, and possible needs for support, are identified. And in our thinking, we see that each child has some kind of individual needs. Something that they are, for example, referring to your talk, they are, how do you say it? Something is close in their development, something is coming, something they are developing in a way that we can support them to achieve, for example, next milestones in their development. Or they might have something that they are very interested in. They might have particular strengths, as all children and we as human beings have. These need to be identified before the plan is drafted. Then the objectives are set for pedagogical work, not for the child. So you don't see, or you shouldn't see in these plans that the child should learn how to do this or that. It's about setting objectives for pedagogical work, which means that you can, for example, read from an ECEC plan that we create possibilities to free play, for example, or we construct the environment in a group in a way that the child will have opportunities to do this and that. Then the measures of how this is actually done in everyday practices needs to be drafted into the plan. And in this too, the focus is on pedagogical work. So when I'm for example giving a lecture about drafting of these plans to future teachers or students who are studying of being teachers, I often say that you have to point out to yourself and your pedagogical work when doing this plan. It is a child's plan and it is for the child, but your actions are actually the ones that matter. You can make the change, you can create the environment, you can teach things in a particular way. And if you just illustrate how the child is like, what kind of small person he or she is, you have done the first steps, but you also have to do the planning. And in Finland it's done in a written form with this ECEC plan. Then if support measures are needed, they are also included into the plan. But then we have a case example, Anna. Anna is now a 2-year-old toddler who started early childhood education and care when she was 9 months old, and we are starting from there. Anna has no special need for special educational support or anything like that, so this is a quite typical case that you could see in Finnish ECEC. And the description that I'm showing is used with permission from the child's parents, who is not in the real world, called Anna. And I have also modified it a bit in order to secure the privacy of the family and the child. So when it all begins, Anna is 11 months and they have already they already know Anna in her ECEC group. It could be written that way, that based on observations, Anna likes to organize and put various items in jars and bags. Perhaps that's what many one-year-olds like to do. Studying and displaying toys is also interesting. Anna can ask for something when she wants something. She goes to the toy shelf, points at it, and looks at the adult. Anna likes music too. Every day, she asks an adult to sing and tells it with her body language, swinging, and at the same time looking at an adult. So there are observations about how she communicates basically in ECEC. And these are as I said, these are drafted and written with Anna's parents. So it's about identifying the individual features of this particular girl's development and way of acting. Then it continues. One of the Anna's strengths is linguistic understanding and self-expression. Although she does not yet have a spoken language, apart from a few words, she is able to express herself very well with her body language and thus often becomes understood. Anna expresses her feelings with crying, laughter, smiles, hugs, and touch. If necessary, she seeks solace in the arms of an adult. So again, we are trying to understand, of course, and you can see the way to pedagogical practices from this way of writing. That's actually one thing that I have been studying, and it's not an easy task for professionals to write it that way and to document in a way that creates a path towards planning the pedagogical activities. Not only describing what the child is doing or what kind of challenges particular are being seen, but trying to identify the things that can be utilized in pedagogical planning. Again, Anna is practicing to express herself verbally. Adult sensitive listening is important for Anna to be understood. It is important that an adult strives to understand and interpret Anna's unspoken communication with their genuine presence. When it comes to expressing emotions and tolerating disappointments, adult must act with understanding yet firm attitude. Emotions are allowed and, if necessary, ways are considered to ease the situation. And here we see some connections to the first presentation, how you can make things easier. And when the planning takes place, there are, for example, some objectives, support for expressing own will and supporting speech that are drafted into the plan. And the measures, striving of understanding, songs, imitation games, books, rhymes, and so on. So it's basically very much about pedagogical planning and focusing on what educators are doing with the child. And the discussion on the extent of documentation and future directions in Finnish ECEC, of course, also take place. We are currently, even though this is a mandatory practice, discussing on how to deal with the bureaucratic nature of documentation and planning. It takes time, as we know. How to balance between individual and collective planning, as these plans need to be combined into the plan for the whole group in ECEC. And how to write in such a way that highlights the pedagogical practices, not, for example, the child's challenges. And for you who are interested, as I said, information is provided by the National Agency for Education in Finland through these links. And also there are some suggestions for additional readings in English in open access manner about pedagogical documentation and these documents in general in Finland. Thank you for your attention.
What did I say? The Finnish always deliver, don't they? I just want to say I'm so happy about all the progress that we're making and the importance that we are putting into the early years of a child's life. And I want to also stress that we are thinking about not only that people, have a better future or healthier future or, productive citizens, but that childhood in and of itself has value and we should cherish it. So we have some interesting questions here in Slido. And so the first one I think is for May-Britt. Are the levels of stress when entering ECEC alarming, or are they at a level where it can be considered beneficial to development?
First, they are not alarming. That's very important to say. And that's also yelling stress levels later in the child care year. It is not alarming. But we cannot say today for sure that it is what I defined as positive stress. Because no study has followed children from transition and assessment of stress and later on. So we can hope that it's positive stress. It is not alarming, that is for sure, but we don't know exactly today what it means.
Thank you. So my daughter has a chance from her Spanish experience?
I guess she has.
So here we have another question that I think many of you can answer actually. Do you have any data on the importance of group size for the youngest children? Who wants to go first?
We based ours with our idea of primary caregivers on standards that were set by Stanford University and were set then for the state of California. And I measured them against other different states because I was working in the terms of the United States and how it was, and that's what they had based it on. The younger they were, you guys know that, the less. There were very few. We only had one 6-week-old while we were there, and she received basically primary individual care because she slept so much. But it was based on research done at Stanford University, what the numbers we had.
I can say something about the group size because in our studies we have not found the best group size, but what we have found is the child-adult ratio. It's so 3 young children per adult. It shouldn't be more than that. It's several studies to have found, but group size we haven't found any number that is better than another. But it's a huge Norwegian study about toddlers that see that smaller group sizes seem to be better, but not an exact number.
Nora, do you want to add something to this?
No, actually, I think that is a discussion, and I think there is a public debate and discourse about this, that fewer children would be better, and also that the smaller ratios, but it's a very good question about what we actually know about this, and that's what I want to highlight, that we are having this also political discussion every now and then in Finland, that what is the actual basis of saying that a particular group size, a particular ratio is better than some other, and you had very good references and good examples from that.
If I could just elaborate, one of the reasons that we wanted to document so highly with the primary caregivers was enable for, as I mentioned, it was being created into an app, so you could then calculate time spent with children and development as it occurs. And you could also, because of the documentation, as you came so well, you could also see where problems exist. And it might not have to do with the group size, but if you're documenting development and what you're doing every day, then you see where problems arise and where a group of 3 doesn't work because there are certain elements that have to do maybe with the development of one child, the adaptation of one child. So that's probably more important than just looking at the numbers that we put out there. If we say 3, more important is documenting what happens when you have 1 adult and 3 children, and you chart their development, you chart the environments, and see.
So we have a couple of questions here about parents, and we cannot overstate the importance of collaboration with parents. And I think in the Nordic countries we start very early with the home visitations and such that we have more or less everywhere. And I just remember when my younger daughter was a baby that I would have the nurse home and she would like let her lift her head and be like, oh, look how good she is. And I was like, yeah, she's perfect. That instantly bonded. I was like, here's a a nurse who seems to know that my child is perfect and a special individual, I already like her, you know. So this is an important bond. So the next questions are about parents. I think we'll take them together and just give everyone a chance to answer. So one is what we do when a children has parents in 2 homes, how we involve parents, and if you have had cases where parents are not easy to collaborate with and what we can do to facilitate that. So who wants to start?
Yeah, that's...
No pressure.
No. That's actually something that when I was working as an ECEC teacher a decade ago, this was an issue, and it is an issue concerning ECEC plans. If it's necessary, sometimes 2 plans can even be drafted. I have seen that kind of practice to take place, but of course they need to be combined somehow. Or at least 2 discussions can be held with parents, one with a father and one with a mother, for example. That's something that I have also been doing. But I would say that in this and in many other occasions, we have to keep the child's best interest in the focus and as the starting point. And that's also a tool to discuss with the parents, that the child's viewpoint and the child's best interest is the one that we as ECEC professionals and professionals in general have to focus on and use that as the starting point. And I think that has made it a bit easier when you start to think about it and discuss it with parents, and to say that this is a child's right to have an ECEC plan, for example, and how could we collaborate in a way that this would be possible.
May-Britt, do you want to add to that? And I think also it's so important we have all this new technology that can maybe help us when we have 2 homes. You don't send just a letter home and one parent gets it.
I think what you say is very important, and the only thing I said is, I think is that the ECEC caregiver may need very much support. If the cooperation is difficult, you don't have to leave, you must not leave it, but you need to go on, and then you need supervision, support, maybe from the leader, maybe from others, so that you can handle the difficulties, because of the child, you need to cooperate with both of the parents.
I'd say the most important thing is time. It was mentioned earlier today that it's really sad to hear from people working in the field how little time they have. And one of the most important things that we need to invest time in is parents. And I noticed when I first came to I'd come to the school many times over a year, and there was a very active, parents were welcome in the classrooms, always. And I know when I worked here in Breitholt, I took the doors off because I wanted the parents to come in, especially parents, if I drop back into, multi-ethnic parents who maybe won't stand in the changing room and ask a lot of questions. That maybe it was better that they were welcomed into the environment to sit down and observe and sit next to a preschool teacher who could then give themselves time to answer a few questions or explain something or listen to what a parent had to say. And I think that that's something that we feel we're all up against, but it's the thing that we most need to give. And I think that speaks for all of the fields that we're working in, whether we're working in child protection, whether we're working as home care providers, whether we're working as nurses or doctors. Time for parents. Because if we don't afford time for them to speak and for us to listen, then that dialogue, they'll always be difficult. And we know we live in a very, very busy world, and to expect time from parents is kind of difficult. But when they see that's all we want from them, it's probably the most important thing, I would say.
Thank you. And so if we take the next question, which is what are the qualities or qualification required by infant teachers or caregivers? Who wants to go first? Finland. Pom, pom, pom.
I see they are relying on me. In general or in our countries?
I think in our context here.
Yeah. In Finland, we have multi-professional teams in ECEC. That's the starting point. So we have teachers in ECEC groups, in daycare centers, at least in a way that every third personnel staff member is a teacher with at least 3 years of training in higher education. And then we have, they are called practical nurses. Basically, they have vocational training of 3 years. And then we also have family daycare, which means that children are in a caregiver's home. And they have no specific qualification requirements, even though they often have some kind of training. So this is varying. And the smallest of the children typically are in ECEC centers, but they also can be in family daycare. Finland has quite a difficult ECEC system to describe, but these are the basic principles. So it varies, but each child should have a teacher in their class if they are not in family daycare.
I think it's much the same in Norway too, but we have had studies about quality in Norway, and we see that the quality is not as high as we want it to be. So I think professional training, in-service training, is very important. And we see also that higher educational level gives higher quality of interaction. So it's very important, I think, to work with quality all the time, and it varies too much, both in Norway and other countries, I'm quite sure.
In Iceland, as in Finland, then teachers are supposed to be 2/3 in every school, but I'm really sad to say now, I'll whisper, that's not how it is. And the standard for, I was really shocked. I was just teaching an upskilling course, like I had mentioned. It's called the First Professional Course, and there was a young person who had never taken any ECA educations, and she was working as what we would call deltastjóri, and she was taking her first fag námskeið. So in Iceland, we're a little bit behind the ball. I was really enamored by, they're not doing much better in America. They're not training a lot of early childhood teachers. But before you could step into or work in a preschool, you had to meet state standards, and you had to have taken 12 hours of training in basic pedagogy. You had to finish a mandatory child protection services course. You had to complete it, take the test, and then you could be certified. So there was a certain standard of basic things that you needed to understand about child development, child care, and then there were safety and health issues, which is something I think would be really nice if we could do here and across the Nords, because we really do want to deliver quality, and quality has to do with the people who we have working in our schools.
Thank you for that, Nicole.
Centers.
And I just want to add, because you were talking about the teaching in Mimir, I was there as well last week, and these are people that have not higher education, but are seeking more information and education. And I was telling them about time management and how it is when I am at my office, and I really need to go to the bathroom, but I don't have the time. And then I just remind myself, like, Jenny, you are not a surgeon. You can actually make the time to go to the bathroom. But surprisingly, many from the group said that they felt like they didn't have time to go to the bathroom working with small children, or even have to use the children's loos, which are super small. So, I mean, this is a planning problem from where I see. I think no one but surgeons should be, have to hold it or wear adult diapers. Another question, maybe you could start with this one, Nicole. How cultural variables play into these ECEC programs, and how we can best support children with different cultural backgrounds.
Again, working with parents. I mentioned, especially the younger they are, I mean, having elements. You don't have to turn your school into the World Trade Center. It doesn't have to be like that. It's little elements. It's little elements like understanding that, some children from certain cultures will maybe use their hands longer to eat with. Little simple things like that. But I think just in the context of what we're talking about today, we're talking about wellness, that it has to do with collaborating with parents. It has to do with giving time to speak with parents, understand their expectations, their ideas about parenthood, about how children grow, That's the most important thing you can do, because you can have flags and all kinds of things in your school, and that's not necessarily going to provide the same comfort as learning why mother holds the child facing out rather than in. It could be a cultural thing. It could be that you just don't understand, so you take the child and you hold them in, and they're insecure. Little things like that. So it's just parents, parents, parents. And then, as I had mentioned earlier this morning, understanding that the idea of a traditional family in cultural aspects isn't just mom and dad and baby, that there are grandmothers and aunties and older brothers and sisters that play a very important role in how the children are raised. Families are different, and they have different structures, and those structures affect how children are raised and how they react to and adapt to the environment we're bringing them to into our early childhood centers. And language. Give them access to language. If it's in song or anything like that, it really helps as a comforting and secure basis.
And maybe you could also answer, May-Britt, what is the earliest age of a child to go to ECEC in Norway?
Yeah, first about multicultural families, because that's, I think it's very important to start before the child starts. If you start to give information, maybe you have a home visit, maybe they can come to visit the ECEC, then you know something about the cultural values and something before, and you can talk. So I think the transition is very important for those families, and you can do very much there. In Norway, it's most children start when they are 11, 12, 13 months, but some children start 10 months, but very few before that, because of the parental leave.
Nora, you want to say something brilliant in the end? We're going to be so good friends after this.
I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I just wanted to add that basically, I think like meeting the multicultural families is about meeting them, like being open and being able to say that I'm not the one who actually knows these things. That's, I think, an issue sometimes, that you don't have to know. You can ask, you can communicate, and if you can communicate with the same language, as in the example of Anna, you can try to understand and find ways to understand. And that's, I think, as you described in your presentation, that you have to give the feeling that you are willing to be there and to understand. That can be achieved in multiple different ways. And in training, for example, teacher training, you can't always say that this is the thing that you have to do. But you can say that you can be open and you can make an atmosphere that says that you are welcome here and your child is welcome here.
Thank you very much. We are not disappointed in Nora, we are not disappointed in May-Britt, and not in Nicole. I'm very happy to have been here with you, and I'm so happy that you all stayed here, and I'm so happy that we are taking these matters into heart, because they matter now and for the future.